Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, in corn, we think about disease control as we're planting the seed, and a lot of times at tassel too. But in between, we're leaving our plants unprotected. We'll talk about a timing somewhere in that V4 to V7 range that could help you with a fungicide application, but we'll be a lot more specific about the timing we think is the exact right time to go.
Well, it's nice to talk about fungicide and, really for that matter, disease control in general, insect control, weed control, but none of that stuff makes nearly as much difference if you don't have the right fertility program out there. Chances are you already put fertilizer out this spring or last fall, but you may need more on your farm. We'll talk about side dress in corn, soybeans, and even late season fertilizer in wheat on today's show.
And it wouldn't be an Ag PhD episode if we didn't have a Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed coming up later in the show. But first, here's today's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about organic matter mineralization. Organic matter is just decayed plant or animal material that's down in the soil, and as that breaks down, they call that mineralization, and then there's a release of nutrients for the next crop.
Well, the mineralization will change during the year. It'll speed up and it'll slow down based on temperature and moisture conditions. As things warm up and as we have a little more moisture, we're going to have more mineralization. So for the crop, it actually works out pretty well, because as that crop develops and it starts to need more plant food, that's just exactly how the soil works and how nature works, because it's going to start breaking down more of that organic matter as we get further into the season.
The reason why we're talking about this today is one of the things that farmers are always looking at is fertilizing their crop. But if they have a lot of organic matter in the soil, they don't need to put on as much fertilizer. For each 1% of organic matter, you'll get a range of 20 to 30 pounds of free nitrogen per year, 4 to 7 pounds of phosphorus, and 2 to 3 pounds of sulfur.
For farmers, what they will do then is figure how much organic matter they have in their soils. Many times soils will have somewhere between 2 and 4% in the Midwest, but it could be anywhere from 0.5% to 7 or 8%. It can really vary quite a bit. So farmers will take soil tests to find out what their organic matter levels are, and then they'll figure what their range in their area is. Like with nitrogen, for example, say it's 20 to 30 pounds per percent of organic matter. Most farmers will say, okay, I'll figure on the safe side and figure 20 pounds for each 1% of organic matter I have. So if I have 4% organic matter in my field, 4 times 20 would be 80 pounds of nitrogen that would come for free during the season.
Again, though, there is a range here, and like Darren said a little bit earlier, more of the organic matter will break down in a warmer year, but the other thing that can speed up that organic matter breakdown is tillage. So if a farmer is going to do tillage, he's in a warm area of the country, and he has an especially warm year, we might figure rather than the 20 pounds, we might figure the 25 to 30 pounds. If he's in a colder area, doesn't do as much tillage, and has a cold year, then 20 pounds is, I'm sure, all he's going to get, and that might even be pushing it sometimes.
As I mentioned before, the organic matter can change quite a bit in different parts of a field and from one area to the next. So we'll often see farmers that have to apply more fertilizer when they have lower amounts of organic matter in the soil versus farmers who have high amounts of organic matter. They're going to get much more mineralization in their fields, and they can get by raising the similar yield goal to the other farmer with much less fertilizer applied. So this is something that's relatively new in agriculture. It's probably happened over the last 10 years that farmers are really looking at what's going to mineralize in their soil, since we have such higher yield goals than we used to have.
Well, once again, organic matter mineralization is simply this organic matter breaking down in soil, releasing free nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur for upcoming crops. Having organic matter break down and release nutrients is important, but so is having great weed control. Can you identify this week's Weed of the Week?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
I will take action against herbicide-resistant weeds. I will know my weeds, and I will stop them before they go to seed. I will do whatever it takes to give my crops the upper hand, and I will use multiple herbicide sites of action because every action counts. I will take action, this time for all time.
Get the most from the genetic potential in your crops, reduce plant stress, and increase yield. BioForge upregulates key genes to keep roots growing and reduce ethylene for improved plant stress tolerance. BioForge mixes well with other products for easy application with every pass through the field. BioForge, progressive growers' choice to improve root growth, reduce crop stress, and increase yield. Make every growing day count with BioForge from Stoller, USA.
The math for getting higher yield potentials is simple. 4 is greater than 2. Steiger Rotrax Series tractors give you proven Case IH Quadtrac technology, helping you cover more acres in less time. And with 4 independent oscillating tracks, you'll also minimize ground pressure and compaction for a better growing environment, all of which adds up to higher potential yields. The world of farming is changing. Be ready with Case IH.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
Over the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about fungicide in corn. Today we want to discuss the early timing, not the tassel timing, but this early timing. And Darren, let's start off with this. What is the right timing between V4, V5 versus V6 or V7? Would you rather be a little early or a little bit late?
All right, well, if you are a manufacturer of fungicides, you want to have as wide a window as you possibly can because you want as many people as possible to be able to use your product.
Yep.
So you say, well, V4 to V7. Now that doesn't sound like it's that big a window. It's not, wow, gosh, it's only a few leaves, that's no big deal. But V4 corn I look at as being pretty short. V7 corn I look at as being really tall and a lot of leaves out there, because by the time you have 7 full collars, that's V7, you've probably got 10 leaves that are out. Well, that's quite a few leaves on a corn plant, and that's a good share of the leaves that are ever going to be there. So for me, I look at these as different phases. V4, V5, pretty similar, fairly early. And yeah, you could go ahead and start putting fungicide out. V6 or V7, much bigger corn, a lot more leaves out there. And the benefit of waiting just a little bit to that V6, V7 timing is that now you have so many more leaves out there and you can only protect the leaves that you cover with fungicide. So where I've seen more gains on our farm and other farms around the country, more yield gain, is if you could wait until V6, V7. Now, if you're in a situation where you have a lot of disease pressure in your area, by all means, you have to get that sprayed before the disease comes. So you may be forced to spray earlier, but in our area, we don't have a whole lot of leaf diseases that time of year because it's pretty hot and it's generally fairly dry. So we're waiting until V6, V7 and getting better gains consistently.
Most of the fungicide companies, though, are talking about plant health benefits, and we totally get that, especially with the stromal urine fungicides, products like Headline or Avito. But the other side of this is companies are telling people, well, hey, you should use products that have 2 different fungicides in there, because if there is some disease out there, you want to have 2 shots at the disease, number 1, and number 2, you don't want to have resistance build up to those stromal urines, because like on our own farm, we're using a stromal urine in the soil, we're using a stromal urine at this V4 to V7 kind of timing, usually preferably V6 or V7, and then potentially even again at tasseling time. I mean, if you're going to do 2 shots and possibly even 3 shots of the same fungicide, that's not a good thing either. So what a lot of people are looking at is one of the combinations, 2 of the most common combinations that are used in this early timing for corn are Fortix and Preaxor.
So when we're looking at those 2 main products, like Fortix, for example, it's Avito, which is stromal urine, plus a triazole, or Preaxor, which is headline in the strobilurin family, plus Xemium, which is in the carboxamide family. So there's a couple different families of fungicides going on in both of those products. I think that's a good recommendation just in terms of disease resistance management, but also just to get more products out there to try and control disease, because you never really know exactly what disease is going to strike. We're, again, treating preventatively.
However, the whole thing with these fungicides is they're not systemic all up and down throughout the plant. So when you spray on a Preaxor or a Fortix product, you're treating the leaves that are there. The new leaves that come out are really not going to have protection. Now granted, I mean, the leaves you are spraying are the older leaves. They're really important at this early stage. You're going to get some plant health benefits that are going to work their way throughout the plant. But in terms of straight disease control, you're only going to have disease protection on the leaves that you treat today. So just kind of keep that in mind. And in terms of residual and how long these products are going to last, we're talking usually 1 to 2 weeks. Now there are companies that are going to say it's a month and 2 months, and that may be true with some of the plant health benefits, but in terms of the actual disease control, like if I've got X disease that's coming in and it's going to show up 2.5 weeks from now, am I counting on my Fortix or my headline to really protect me? No, I'm going to have to spray again later on.
The other thing that I look at is when we're talking about this V4 to V7 window is a lot of times we're going to be spraying that fungicide with something else. I know most farmers that I'm talking to are thinking, well, I'm going to spray some Roundup, or I'm going to spray some Callisto, Laudis, Impact, Status, you name the post-emerge broadleaf herbicide in corn, and that may dictate what your timing is. For example, if you're spraying something that has dicamba in it, you may want to get that done as early as you could. Maybe it's V4, V5, that's probably as late as you want to go with dicamba. All of a sudden, all right, I want to put that fungicide out, but I'm not going to have time to make a second trip, so I'm going to have to go towards that V4, V5 timing. We're not saying that your fungicide isn't going to work and isn't going to give you some benefit in that timing. We're just saying from what we've seen in our farm and a number of other farms around the country, we've seen a little better yield gain from the fungicide portion of that mix, pushing it a little bit later. If you need the weed control, by all means, don't wait a few more leaf stages, because those weeds, especially if it's something like lamb's quarters or one of the pig weeds, they're going to grow quite rapidly out in your field, and you're going to suffer some yield loss from that more than what you're going to gain waiting with the fungicide.
Darren mentioned herbicides, and it is very common to throw a herbicide together with a fungicide, and for that matter, you can even throw an insecticide in there too. But when you do that, that's going to change what you're going to want for adjuvants. So if it's me and I'm out there spraying a Preaxor or a Fortix plus one of the broadleaf herbicides plus glyphosate, generally speaking, we're throwing ammonium sulfate in there and no other adjuvants. Some of the fungicide companies will talk about throwing crop oil in. There's no way that I want to do that with some of the different post-emerge herbicides like dicamba or Status, for example. That's really going to heat things up if you've got all those products mixed together. So just make sure you're talking to your agronomist and you get the right spray adjuvants together with the mix that you use on your farm.
And as far as timing goes, we're talking about V4 to V7, somewhere in that window. And then the next time that we're normally spraying a fungicide would be after the corn is fully tasseled, and usually you're going to see all the silks out across your field just to be on the safe side before you start pulling the trigger on another fungicide, because there is a timing in there between V8 and tassel that corn plants are pretty sensitive, and you can actually cause some injury if you're putting the fungicide out at the wrong time,
well,
especially with certain surfactants.
Yeah, it's not really the fungicide so much, it's mainly the surfactant. So you get crop oil out there, or some of these other more harsh adjuvants together with the fungicide, and that can cause some problems. So don't get too worried about you're going to hurt your corn with fungicide. You're not. But all we're trying to say is there are two main timings in corn to spray fungicide. It's the early timing, it's the post-tasseling timing, you know, silking, right in that range. And for the early timing, we do think in many cases that can provide a decent investment, can give you some plant health benefits, but just take a look at some of these combination products, and we prefer a V6 or V7 timing to the V4 to V5 timing. That's when we've seen just a little bit better yield data.
Well, if you have a lot of our weed of the week, you're going to have to be leaning towards the early timing because it's going to be out there early in the season. Can you identify this week's weed?
If you could see how nitrogen loss causes yield loss, you'd fix it. So fix it right, with the stabilizer proven to reduce all 3 ways nitrogen escapes. Nutrisphere N Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager. It keeps nitrogen in a more readily available form longer. With today's market and environment, it's a high priority to keep your nitrogen on track. To higher yield with Nutrisphere N.
farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Can I grow my crop without the expense of fertilizer additives?
You can. Conditions forcing you to make some tough choices? Choose agricultural liquid fertilizers and you won't need stabilizers or nutrient managers, eliminating expense and hassle. Millions of acres and years of replicated research have proven that with ProGerminator, SureK, High Energy and MicroLink, you can grow a great crop without costly additives. To learn more and find a dealer near you, visit agroliquid.com.
You can put more bushels in your bin without expanding the farm with YieldTrack. The new 24-row planter from Titan Machinery features the Case IH Early Riser planting system. YieldTrack will take you to the field first with extra flotation come spring. The tracks eliminate pinched rows and reduce compaction. All 22 and 30-inch YieldTracks come loaded with Case IH technology, including cable drive and AccuRow. Grab more bushels from every acre with YieldTrack from Titan Machinery.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
Late season fertilizer in corn, soybeans, and wheat. Obviously, people talk a lot about wheat and corn, but we want to spend a little time. Let's start with soybeans, Darren, because that's where everybody is just forgetting about it, I think.
I don't know if I would term this late season fertility. I would term this mid-season at best.
Well, whatever you want to call it.
Late season, I'm thinking about the reproductive stages
Sure.
on these crops.
Fair enough.
Now, we're talking about this because you can still drive through the field. If you can still drive through the cornfield and do an application yourself, you can still do some side
Yeah, but let's talk about the soybeans. That's where we wanted to start here. With soybeans, you can do the same thing, and people ask all the time. The first question is, does my soybean plant produce enough nitrogen? No. No soybean plant in the world produces enough nitrogen for itself to maximize yield. But don't forget, there's all kinds of nitrogen in the soil already. There's nitrogen breaking down, getting released from organic matter mineralization, and a lot of times that's enough. But in some cases, especially when you have adverse weather conditions, you've had some flooding, you haven't planted soybeans very often,
you have extreme drought,
you have high or low soil pH, there are a lot of issues, a lot of factors that might enter in that you might want to put on a little bit more nitrogen. The right timing to do that, if I could have any one time, would be at first flower. If I can get some rain shortly after that, then that nitrogen can get into the plant. But just understand, at the flowering timings, flowering and early pod, that's where the plant needs lots of nitrogen. It's also taking in lots of P and K. And a lot of people also don't realize that the amount of potassium that a 60 bushel soybean crop needs, just grain removal only, let's start there, is way more than what a corn crop needs for grain removal only. So in total, it takes a lot of pounds of potassium if you're going to raise a good soybean crop.
When you think about this side dress timing, and we're talking about, relatively early in the season, again, we're trying to get out there while we can still drive through the field before those soybeans have bushed in and filled the rows. And, we're talking about having a little bit of space. If you've got a 10-inch row or a 7.5-inch row on beans, that's pretty tight. We can't really do much as far as placing fertilizer down into the soil. But when we're a little bit wider, when we're a 20-inch row, 30-inch row, and so forth, and wider, we can certainly do this. Now, we're also concerned about pruning roots. That's another topic that we can get into. But just to finish up on Brian's point, we aren't just talking about putting nitrogen out. We may be talking about putting some more P and some more K out there. Those nutrients, especially if you're using a dry fertilizer like a MAP or a DAP, it's going to take a little time for those nutrients to become available. And also, even if you're using a liquid liquid product like a Pro Germinator or a Sure-K or Calibrate, something like that, those fertilizers need a little bit of moisture to get into that root system.
Right.
So we want to put them down into the soil because P and K, whether it's in a liquid or dry formulation, they don't move down through the soil profile with water very well at all. We want to put them down into the soil, and then it's going to take a little bit of time to get them available and into the crop. So we want to do it about this timing so they start to become available by the time we get into those reproductive stages and have such a high demand for nutrients.
In other words, err on the early side rather than on the late side. That buys you more time to get rain. Now, Darren mentioned NP and K, but let's not forget about sulfur and micronutrients. Those are also important, and I can just tell you in our own operation, on corn and on soybeans, certain years we are putting some on later on. Now, you can foliar feed if you want to. I guess our main topic today is laying it on the ground or injecting it into the ground. One way or the other, we like seeing some of those nutrients get out there. Foliar feeding, you can only put a small amount of nutrients on. The leaves can only absorb a small amount, so you'd have to be out there on a very regular basis. But like in wheat, for example, we'll stream bar wheat where we have little streams of nitrogen that are getting dropped out, and when we do that, we're also putting on sometimes some micronutrients, definitely some sulfur every time, and occasionally some P and K. So these are just some things that we want you to be thinking about, and how you know whether or not you should do this is by looking at your soil tests, seeing what your soil fertility program already was, and then taking plant tissue samples.
Now back to that root pruning. There's a lot of difference out there in the way that farmers are doing side dress, whether it's doing kind of heavy incorporation or heavy field cultivation. Others are just using a coulter and trying to inject some nutrients, or a knife and trying to inject some nutrients without doing lots of tillage. Our goal is to do the lowest amount of tillage as we possibly can, because anytime you're doing some heavy tillage out there during the season, you're releasing moisture. And if you're in a situation where you're normally too dry rather than too wet, chances are you probably don't want to give up a lot of that moisture right in the middle of the season.
So what Darren is saying is all we're doing is running a coulter out there in between the rows in 30-inch rows on our farm in corn and soybeans, and that works quite well. And above all else, the main thing that we want you to be thinking about today is trying some new things out in your farm. Trying some side dressing, trying some late season application of nitrogen, soybeans or wheat. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but just a little bit. And a lot of farmers have been doing this and finding there's yield gain there. Split applying the nitrogen usually allows you to put on less nitrogen, so it's again better for the environment and better for your pocketbook.
Multiple applications of fertilizer are generally a good idea. It's also the same thing with weed control. We want to take a couple of shots to try and get our weed of the week. We'll explain coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Your farm tells a story, one that continues with the decisions you make. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is Virginia Groundcherry.
Virginia Groundcherry is a smooth, kind of waxy leaf and stem plant, and it is a perennial weed. And whenever we're talking about perennial weeds, we really want to start off with Roundup, because we want something that's going to get down into that root system and kill the plant root and all. Fortunately, Virginia Groundcherry is not a weed that's shown any resistance to Roundup.
No, so if you go with the maximum labeled rate of Roundup, preferably as early on in the season as possible, you should be in pretty good shape.
Then when we're talking about in-crop applications in corn, our favorite choice here is Status. Anything with dicamba in it will do a pretty good job. It seems to be better than what the HPPDs will do. In soybeans, it's pretty tough. We don't have good options. So if you've got Liberty Link soybeans or Roundup Ready soybeans, you can spray Liberty or Roundup in crop. That would be your best bet.
One of the important things is not doing lots of tillage to try to get rid of almost any perennial weed. We encourage you to leave the perennial roots intact, then hit it with a good strong rate of Roundup, and that's usually where you get the best control.
In wheat, I like Husky post-emerge. Then you've got a good shot of Buctril in there. That should be enough heat to burn down that Virginia Groundcherry.
Well, once again, our weed of the week is Virginia Groundcherry, and that's all the time we have for this week's weed. But stay tuned, Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
Now is the time for the final check of your planter's performance. I'll show you what I mean in today's Iron Talk. We've been pretty dry on our farm. Bone dry is more like it. We've gotten some moisture, 4 inches over the last 7 months, counting all the snow from this winter. So basically, we're planting into some pretty dry soils again. So how should you be running the planter, and how can you get an indication that adjustments were made properly? I like to watch as the crop emerges. The best farmers in the country shoot to have every plant in the field up in the same 24-hour period. The key this year in the dry soil has been to have a consistent planting depth and maybe even more importantly, good seed-to-soil contact. When the soil is loose and fluffy, it's tough to keep seed-to-soil contact ideal. On our farm, you can see differences in certain soil types and it's almost impossible to completely avoid it since there are almost always at least 3 or 4 soil types across every field. Closing the furrow and packing it again made a big difference for us this year, and it's something to watch for on your farm too. Make a point to scout and investigate emergent successes and failures on your farm with each crop and make the necessary adjustments. Seed-to-soil contact is always important, but in dry soils this year on our farm, it was even more critical than normal. You may be fighting the opposite conditions on your farm this spring. Scouting and making the proper adjustments to your seeding equipment is equally important to you. Be diligent. That's all time for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
Could I boost my potential by foliar feeding?
You can. Foliar feeding can correct nutrient deficiencies and sustain your crop through stress. It's a great way to deliver nutrients that your crop lacks to reach its full potential. Research proves it. Applied alone or in combination with your crop protection program, AgroLiquid products assure that when the season presents opportunity, you can boost your crop's yield potential by foliar feeding. For more info, visit agroliquid.com.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's a head above the rest.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
The Case IH Spring Sales Event is on now, making it a great time to get the equipment you need for this season. With 0% financing for 60 months on all Farmall and Maxim Series tractors, as well as our complete line of hay tools, you can turn everyday chores into everyday savings. But hurry, the Spring Sales Event ends June 30th, 2014. For more information, ask your local Case IH dealer or go to caseih.com/special offers.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to tune in to Ag PhD Radio each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Sirius XM Channel 80. Darren and I talk about important agronomic topics, and we take your phone calls live every day.
And join us again for Ag PhD TV, where we'll have another Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Farmers focus on controlling weeds in their fields in order to produce more food. Abundant food supplies help Americans spend less of their income on food than nearly any other country in the world. To learn how farmers do it, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.